Now, I'm glad that Reverend Kim decided to warm you up because I have a joke for you. I usually start with a joke, and kind of helps that you're prepped for that. A story of a new pastor to a new church, and I'm a new bishop on the block, so it's sort of appropriate. And this pastor was at his first Sunday, and he really wanted to impress his new congregation, so he worked really hard on this first sermon, put hours into it. And the day came, and he delivered what he thought was a magnificent sermon. He thought he really nailed it. And afterwards, in the receiving line, everybody was thanking him. And he came across this little bald-headed old man who said, "Thank you very much for the sermon, Reverend, but, you know, I was a little confused of where you're going, and you kind of lost me." Wow, this was his first criticism. So he said, thank you. I'm really going to try better the next time. I'll really work on that. And he went on to the next person and goes down the line about 20 more people. And there was this little bald-headed old man again in line. And he says, "Thank you very much for the sermon, Reverend. But it was a little too long, and I really didn't pay much attention to the second half of the sermon." That's pretty strong. He said, told the little man, I apologize. I'm really going to try better the next time, and quickly went to the next person. Well, he finished up the entire line, and who would be at the end of the line but that little bald-headed old man again? I thought, this is just really weird. Now what's he going to say to me? The little old man said, "Thank you for the sermon, Reverend, but it was really boring, and I fell asleep through most of it." Wow. Now the pastor was mad. He said, "Who does this little bald-headed old man think he is, coming into the line 3 times to insult me?" And he quickly seeks out the lay leader of the church, pulls him aside and says, "Who is that little bald-headed old man?" The lay leader says to him, "Oh, don't mind him, Reverend. He's a little bit off. He just goes around repeating what he hears other people saying." Now, as I encounter that little bald-headed old man for your congregation, I hope that it's not too harsh on me today. I do want to talk to you about your anniversary, though, in 100 years. And I'd like to do this in the context of a time frame, the past, the present, and the future. And to see how God's grace, God's absolute grace, is shining forth throughout all of those time dimensions. To look at the past, we have to really look at the pioneers of the church, those dedicated people whom laid the foundation upon which we now stand. Probably starting with very little, they built this church brick by brick, 2 by 4 by 2 by 4, laying all of the foundation upon which we now stand as members currently. We must look at their great dedication, spurred on by God's love. I once had this conversation with a second-generation Japanese-American woman who told the story of her father, a first-generation Japanese immigrant to the rural California countryside. And she said that every Sunday, the father would gather up all the children and jam them into this old Ford and drive 100 miles to the closest Christian church. She said they got up at like 5 o'clock in the morning, hit the road about 5:30, and it took them about 2.5 hours to get to this church. She said the roads were bad and that old Ford didn't go very fast. And they reveled in that day. They worshiped with that congregation. They broke bread with the congregation for lunch. Everybody bought potluck. Then they had Bible studies and meetings and prayer groups. And she said about 3 o'clock in the afternoon, they'd gather up all the kids, climb into that old Ford, and head 2.5 hours back home. And as soon as they got home, they got ready for bed because the next day they had to get up at the same time for work and for school. She said they did that every Sunday without fail. With a gleam in her eye, she said,